My aunt billed my dying father for the care I gave him free. I audit people like her for a living. She set a brand new brass lock on the kitchen counter, still sealed in its plastic, next to the store receipt. And she said it the way some people say grace before a meal. It is cleaner this way. Family shouldn't have to fight over a sick man. 4 years, I had cared for my father with my own 2 hands, and never once taken $1 for it. Here is the thing. My aunt did not know I would ever be able to prove. She had already paid herself about $156,000 for that same care. My care. And she had sworn to every cent of it, under oath, in a courtroom. With her hand raised, I drove away from my father's house that morning, with a key that no longer fit the door, and a small candy tin that wasn't even mine to take. Today, I read numbers, like hers, for a living. I am a forensic fiduciary accountant. That means I audit the people a court trusts to spend a helpless person's money. And I catch the ones who help themselves. Last spring, after years of looking away, I finally opened my own family's file, and I made her give back every stolen year. To the dollar. The same cold way I make strangers do it every single week. My name is Maren Voss. I am 36 years old, and if you have ever been the one who did all of the caring and got counted as nothing. The strong one, the sturdy one, the one who could handle it, then stay with me, because you already understand the first half of the story. The most honest thing my aunt ever produced in her life was the paperwork she believed would protect her. It is the thing that finally set my father free. If you've ever been the family member who was relied on for everything and thanked for none of it, do me one favor before I go on. Like this video and stay with me. This is where it changes. Let me tell you how time works in this story, so you never lose your place, because I am going to move through a lot of years. And I only want you to hold on to one date. Everything turns on. A single morning. Sunday, the 6th of October, 2024. The morning the locks changed. From here on, every single thing I tell you, I'll tell you as before that morning or after that morning. You will always know where you are standing. I promise you that, because for most of my life nobody gave me that, and I know what it costs. Now let me take you all the way back to the beginning of it. 6 years before that morning, my mother died. She died the way she lived, quietly disapproving of the fuss. And at the funeral, standing at the front of a cold church in a coat the color of whetstone, her younger sister took my hand in both of hers, leaned in close, and said the first of the words I would come to hate. You don't worry about a thing, Maren. Family doesn't send invoices. My aunt is named Lorraine Keel. Remember that phrase, because she said it to me for 6 years, in kitchens and hospital hallways, and the front seats of cars, always in the same warm voice. And it always meant the exact opposite of what the word said. Family doesn't send invoices. She said it every time she wanted something done. For free, she said it. It turned out, while she was writing the invoices herself. Here is what you need to understand about Lorraine, and it is the most important thing I can tell you about her. So, I'll say it plainly. She was never loud. She never screamed. She never once, in 6 years, raised her voice at me. Everything she did to my father, she did calmly, in daylight, with a pen. And she believed the whole time that she was the responsible one. That is the kind of person this story is about. Not a monster, a system, a calm, concerned, methodical system with a notary stamp and a filing deadline. My father was still fine. Back then. That is the part that breaks me a little. Even now. At my mother's funeral, my father, Errol Voss, stood next to me with a butterscotch candy in his cheek. He always had one. Since I was a girl. And he squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll be all right, Mare. You and me. We'll be all right." He was 64. He had built houses for a living for 40 years, and his hands were the size of dinner plates, and he still knew my name. Hold on to two things. From that day, the butterscotch, and the man who still knew my name. You are going to want them later. 2 years after we buried my mother, the phone calls started to go strange. My father called me one Tuesday to ask where the grocery store was. He had lived 4 blocks from that grocery store for 30 years. He called it a good store, and he could not tell me how to get there. He laughed about it. I did not laugh. I drove over that same afternoon. It took the doctors another 8 months to give it a name: early onset Alzheimer's. His neurologist, I'll just call her his neurologist. You don't need her name, only what she wrote down, because what she wrote down is going to matter enormously later. His neurologist told us it would be slow at first, and then it would not be slow. She was right about that. I made a decision that week that I do not regret and would make again. I moved my father into the routine of my life. Not into my house, not at first. He wanted his own home, his own porch, his own chair. So I went to him every morning before work, and every evening after. I did his pills. I did his meals. I did the thing at 3 in the morning where you sit with a frightened man who does not know why he is frightened, and you hold his hand until the fear passes. 4 years of that. I want you to hear the number, and then I want you to hear what it cost, because those are 2 different things. 4 years. Roughly 1,400 nights, and on maybe 1,000 of those nights, when I finally got back in my car to drive home, my father had left the porch light on for me. He couldn't remember my birthday. By the end, he couldn't remember my mother's face. But some animal part of him remembered that his girl drove home in the dark. And he left the light on. I would sit in my car at the bottom of his driveway and look at that yellow light over the door, and I would let myself believe, for exactly as long as it took the engine to warm up, that I was still somebody's child. Remember, the porch light. I am going to give it back to you at the end, and it is going to mean something completely different by then. Let me give you one of those 1,400 nights, so the word caregiving stops sounding soft and starts sounding like what it actually was, because later it matters, in a courtroom. Exactly what that word cost and who paid it. One night, the winter after his diagnosis, call it 2 years before the morning the locks changed. My father woke at 3 in the morning, certain the house was not his house. I found him standing in the hallway in his undershirt, and he did not know me. And he was frightened in the specific bottomless way the illness does it. He asked me, very politely, to please leave his home before his wife came back and found a stranger there. His wife had been dead 2 years. You learn not to correct him. You learn that being right is worth nothing at 3 in the morning, and being calm is worth everything. So I made him a cup of decaf he wouldn't drink, and I sat with him at the kitchen table under the one light over the sink, and I talked about the houses he'd built. The split level over on Ridgeline, the church addition, the porch he was proudest of, until the fear drained out of his shoulders. Around 5, he called me Mare again, like nothing had happened. and asked what was for breakfast. Then I showered and drove to work and spent the day auditing a stranger's stolen money on 4 hours of sleep. Nobody paid me for that night. I need you to hold on to that, because somebody wrote that night down as a professional service and cashed it. Just not me. Now, here is where my aunt walks back into the story. And here is where I have to tell you what I do for a living. Because the cruelest part of all of this is that I should have seen it coming. Seeing it coming is literally my job. I have worked for a long time now at a firm that does one narrow, strange, important thing. When a court decides a person can no longer manage their own money because of age or illness or a mind that has started to let go, the court appoints someone to manage it for them. That person is called a conservator. They control everything: the bank accounts, the house, the pension, all of it. And once a year, the conservator has to file a report with the court, under oath, showing exactly where every dollar went. That report is called an accounting. My job is to read those accountings and find the lies in them. I read them all day. A conservator who paid herself a management fee of $4,000 a month for visiting her mother twice. A nephew who sold his uncle's truck and wrote down that it was donated. A caregiver who billed for a full-time nurse and hired a part-time cousin. People rob the helpless in the most boring handwriting you have ever seen. My whole career, I have known one thing better than I know almost anything else. Money remembers what people choose to forget. That line isn't mine. It belongs to the woman who trained me. Her name is Ruth, and she is the one true ally in this story. So I'll introduce her properly. I had worked beside Ruth for the better part of 8 years, by the time everything went wrong. She was 60-something, sharp as a filleting knife, and she never once tried to fix my life for me. She just kept handing me the truth and letting me decide what to do with it. My first week on the job, watching me stare at the drained account of a widow who trusted the wrong son, Ruth said the thing I have carried ever since. Money remembers what people choose to forget. Marin, our whole job is just to read it back to them. Out loud. Keep that. Too. Read it back to them. Out loud. I am going to do exactly that. In a courtroom, before this is over. So there I was, a woman whose entire profession was catching people who steal from the helpless. And my Aunt Lorraine, calm and concerned and methodical, walked into a courtroom in the spring after my father's diagnosis. About 3.5 years before the morning, the locks changed, and asked the court to make her his conservator, to control his money, to protect him. There was a hearing. I was in the room, and this is the part I have replayed more than any other. Because I could have stopped all of it right there with one sentence, and I didn't. The judge asked, in the mild way judges ask, whether any other family member wished to serve or objected. That was my moment. All I had to do was raise my hand and say, I am his daughter. I am here every day, and I audit conservators for a living. I would have been appointed on the spot. I know the law well enough to know that, but Lorraine had leaned over to me in the hallway 10 minutes earlier, taken both my hands, and said, You do the loving, Marin, and let me do the boring part. You are already carrying so much. Family doesn't send invoices, and I was so tired and so grateful to hand one heavy thing to somebody else that I sat on my hands and I said nothing. The judge signed the order. Lorraine got the checkbook. I got to keep doing the loving. I have spent a great deal of my life since being angry at her. It took me longer to forgive the woman in that courtroom, who stayed silent because silence felt like rest. If you have ever handed the boring part to someone because you were simply too exhausted to hold one more thing, you already know how she got in the door. She didn't break in. I opened it. Stay with me. This is where it turns. A little over a year into the caregiving, I noticed the first number that didn't sit right. I wasn't looking. I want to be clear about that. I was at my father's kitchen table, paying his electric bill, which I still did, out of my own account, because it was easier than asking Lorraine. And the bank statement I'd pulled up by accident showed a withdrawal I didn't recognize, a round number. $1,000 out of his account, the first Monday of the month. And then I scrolled the way you do. And there it was again, the month before, and the month before that. I asked Lorraine about it, lightly. The way you ask family. She smiled and said, "That is the caregiver stipend. Honey, the court allows it. It is for his care." His care. I was his care. I was standing in his kitchen with his pill organizer in my hand, asking about it. But I was tired, and she was calm, and she said the court allowed it, and she was technically correct. Correct, a conservator is allowed to pay for a caregiver. So I let it go. I told myself she must be paying someone to cover the hours I couldn't. A day nurse, maybe. Someone I hadn't met. There was no day nurse. There was never a day nurse. There was only me, and a withdrawal, and a smile. That was the first thread. I didn't pull it. I want you to understand that I had the exact skill required to pull that thread and unravel the whole thing right then, in that kitchen. And I did not pull it, because she was my mother's sister, and I was so tired, and I wanted, more than I wanted the truth, to believe that somebody in my family was on my side. If you have ever talked yourself out of the thing you already knew because knowing it would cost too much, because knowing it would mean your own family had done this to you, then you know precisely where I was standing in that kitchen, holding a pill organizer, choosing not to see it. I am not proud of that woman, but I understand her now. The second thread came about a year later, and this one I did tug, just once, and it went taut in my hand, and I let go anyway. It was a small thing. I went into my father's bank on a Thursday to move $300 of my own money into his checking account, because his heating bill had gone up, and I didn't want to bother Lorraine for something that small. The teller, a kind young man, this isn't his fault, turned his monitor a few degrees away from me, the way they do when something they didn't expect comes up on the screen, and he said, "I am sorry, ma'am. There is a conservatorship hold on this account. I can take a deposit, but I can't show you any activity or balance without the conservator's authorization. A hold on my father's account that I, his daughter, the one buying his heating oil, was not authorized to even look at." I stood there with $300 in my hand that I was allowed to give, but not allowed to watch, and a professional part of my brain, the 8 years of this part, sat up very straight and said, quietly, "That is what it looks like when someone doesn't want the family reading the boring part." And the tired daughter part of my brain said, "She is just being careful. That is what conservators do." Don't make it weird. The tired daughter won. She usually did. She won for 2 more years. Over the next 2 years, the visits got harder to schedule, always for a good reason. His routine can't handle so many faces, Marin. The doctor said consistency. Let's not overwhelm him. Each rule was reasonable on its own. That is how a system works. Every single bar on the cage is reasonable on its own. It is only when you step back that you see it is a cage. And then came the morning. The locks changed. Sunday, the 6th of October, 2024. Our standing day. 9 in the morning. I want to give this to you the way I lived it, minute by minute, because I have gone over it so many times that it plays behind my eyes, like something I filmed. It was a soft gray morning, maybe 58 degrees. The kind of Sunday where the whole street smells like other people's coffee. I parked at the bottom of the driveway, the way I always did. I had a bag over my shoulder with his week's medication sorted into the little plastic organizer. And in my coat pocket, I had his butterscotch tin, refilled. Because I refilled it every Sunday, because it was the one thing left that still made his face do the thing his face used to do. The porch light was off. That was the first thing. It was daytime. So that shouldn't have meant anything. But he never turned it off. In 4 years, he had never once turned it off. Because turning it off was a thing that required him to remember it was on. And he could not do that anymore. Someone had turned it off. Someone whose mind still worked. I went up the 3 porch steps. I put my key in the lock. The key did not turn. I took it out. I looked at it. I put it back in. It did not turn. There was a brass shine to the lock that had not been there the Sunday before. A new deadbolt, bright and unscratched, taped to the door at eye level, was a single sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve to keep the weather off it. It was typed. It was addressed to me by my full name, Maren Elise Voss. It said that, effective immediately, and by order of the conservator, this residence was closed to unscheduled visitors, and that all future contact regarding Errol Voss was to be arranged in writing through Lorraine Keel. It said my father had been moved to a memory care facility for his safety and comfort. It gave the name of the facility. It did not give the room number. At the bottom, it thanked me in advance for respecting his need for stability. I read it twice. My hands did not shake. I have thought a great deal about why my hands did not shake. And I think it is because some part of me had been reading this exact document in other people's files for 8 years, and my body recognized it before my heart did. This was the document. This was the one I found in the folders of the widows and the forgotten fathers. The polite, typed, weatherproofed notice that says the person you love now belongs to the paperwork. I stood on the porch of the house my father built with his own hands, holding a bag of his pills and a tin of his candy, locked out of it by a brass bolt someone had installed while I slept. I did not knock. There was no one inside to answer. I peeled the notice off the door. I still have it. It is in the file. I'll come back to it. And I folded it once and put it in my pocket next to the candy tin. I walked back down the 3 steps. I did not knock again, and I did not raise my voice. And I did not pull the car door shut hard the way an angry person would. I closed it quietly, the way you close a door when the person on the other side is asleep, even though there was no one on the other side and no one asleep. And I drove to the facility named on the paper. I want to tell you about one moment there, and then I am going to let you breathe. Because I only get to cry once in this whole story, and this is where I spent it. They let me in to see him. As a daughter, I still had that much. A nurse walked me down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and applesauce, and she opened a door. And there was my father, in a chair by a window, in a cardigan. I had never bought him, looking out at a courtyard. He did not recognize him. I said, "Hi, Dad." I sat down across from him. I took his hand. He looked at me with a kind of gentle, terrible politeness, and he said, "Are you one of the girls from the church?" I said, "No, Dad, I am Marin. I am your daughter." He nodded the way you nod, at a stranger who has told you something you have no reason to doubt and no way to feel. He said, "That is nice." And then he looked back out the window. I reached into my coat pocket and I took out the butterscotch tin, and I opened it and I held it out to him, and his hand, his enormous, house-building hand, reached in without him even looking. The way your body reaches for the thing it has done 10,000 times. And he took a butterscotch and put it in his cheek, and for 1/2 of 1 second, something crossed his face. Not recognition, just comfort, the animal comfort of a taste his body remembered. Even after his mind had let me go, I stayed 40 minutes. Then I walked out to my car in the facility parking lot, and I sat down behind the wheel, and I did not start the engine, and I put both hands over my mouth, and I cried the way you cry when you cannot make any noise, because there was no one to hear it, and nothing anyone could do. Once. That was the once. I have not cried since, and you'll understand, by the end, why I didn't need to, because somewhere in the drive home, the crying stopped, and something else took its place. And it has never fully left. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud, and I am not loud. It was the quiet, cold, professional feeling I get at my desk when a set of numbers stops looking like a family and starts looking like a crime. They had made one mistake. My calm and methodical aunt. She had spent her whole life around people who did the loving while she did the boring part. She had forgotten what I did the boring part for a living. Stay with me. Everything I've told you so far is the wound. Now, I am going to tell you what I did about it. Here is the week after the locks changed, and here is where Ruth gave me the sentence I'll carry to my grave. I told her at work, in the small kitchen where we made bad coffee, standing up, in about 6 flat sentences with no adjectives, because that is the only way I could get through it. The locks. Defenda. The notice. The chair by the window. The church girls. She listened, without fixing a single thing. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she put down her mug, and she said, "Marin, you've spent 8 years reading other people's grief back to them out loud. And it never once occurred to you that someone would rob you the same way." She let that sit. Then she said the part I hear at night. Grief keeps no receipts. That is exactly why people steal from the grieving. So you are going to do the one thing they never expect from the family. You are going to keep the receipts. Keep the receipts. I went back to my desk and I did not cry, and I opened a blank page, and at the top of it I typed my father's name, the way I type a stranger's name at the start of every case. And, for the first time in 6 years, I stopped being his daughter and started being his auditor. Let me tell you how I built the case, because none of it, not one step, required me to break a single rule, and that matters more than anything. My competence was going to win this, or nothing was. If I had to cheat to beat her, she would have deserved to walk. She didn't get to walk because I didn't have to cheat. Here is the thing about a conservatorship, that a person like Lorraine never truly believes until it is too late. The very control that lets them steal is the thing that hangs them, because the court makes a conservator file that yearly accounting, under oath, in a public court file. And I, as the man's daughter, as what the law calls an interested person, had the absolute right to walk into that courthouse and read every page my aunt had ever sworn to. She had built her whole quiet empire on the assumption that no one in the family would ever read the boring part. I read the boring part. I want to take you through what I found the way I found it, one document at a time, because that is how it actually lands. Not all at once, but page by page, each one worse than the last. I'll give each one a plain name, so you never mix them up. There are 3 of them. Just 3. That is all it ever takes. The first one I call the ledger. The ledger was her yearly accountings. 3 of them, stacked, one for each year she'd been conservator, and on page after page, in that boring handwriting I've read 1,000 times, was a line item that repeated every single month. Caregiver services. Paid. 2L. Kiel. And beside it, the hours. $20 an hour. 50 hours a week. For 3 years, on paper, my aunt had personally cared for my father, 50 hours a week, and paid herself for it, out of his savings. Let me do that math for you, because you should never have to do it yourself. 50 hours a week at $20 an hour is $1,000 a week. Over 3 years, it came to about $156,000. Now here is what that number actually is. That is a house down payment. That is more than most people in this country make in 3 years of full-time work, and every dollar of it was paid to Lorraine out of my father's accounts for care that I gave. On the exact dates her ledger claimed she was there, I have text messages, pharmacy pickup records, and my own work badge logs, proving I was the one in that kitchen. And she was nowhere near it, and I'll tell you the line in that ledger that I found last and stared at longest. Remember the winter night I told you about? My father in his undershirt in the hallway at 3 in the morning, asking me to leave his own house. I know the date of that night, because I texted Ruth the next morning to say I'd be late and half asleep. It was a Tuesday. And on Lorraine's ledger, that same week, in that boring, even handwriting, was a line billing my father's estate for 50 hours of care. She said she provided. She was not in that house that night. She was not in that house any night. I was the one who sat under the light over the sink until the fear left his shoulders, and she is the one who got paid for it. $20 an hour, and swore to it under oath. If you have ever done the hardest, most invisible work of your life for free while watching somebody else get thanked and paid for it, comment the word receipts below. Because this next part is for you. She billed a dying man for his daughter's love, and she wrote it down in her own hand. Ruth was right. Money remembers what people choose to forget. That alone would have been enough to remove her. But I told you there were 3. And the second one is the one that changed this from a sad story into a criminal one. The second document I call the loan. My father's house was paid off. He had burned the mortgage papers in his own backyard the year I turned 20, in a coffee can, and let me toast a marshmallow over it. That house was clean. It owed nothing to anyone. In the file, dated the 3rd of March, 2023, was a line of credit taken out against that house, a loan, secured by the home, drawn down by the conservator. $180,000 pulled out of the walls of the house my father built, against a home that had owed nothing to anyone for 2 decades, and the loan was notarized. There is a stamp on it, a notary seal, the little inked mark that is supposed to prove a real person swore in front of a real official that they were. who they said they were and that they signed of their own free will. The stamp certified that Errol Voss appeared in person, of sound mind, and signed this loan on the 3rd of March, 2023. Here is the page I set down right next to it. Remember his neurologist, the one whose name you didn't need. On the 9th of January, 2023, 7.5 weeks before that loan, his neurologist had signed a formal capacity letter. A single page, on clinic letterhead, stating in plain medical language that Errol Voss no longer had the mental capacity to understand or enter into any financial or legal agreement. Read those 2 dates back to back the way I did. Standing at the courthouse counter, January 9th. A doctor swears he cannot understand a contract. March 3rd, a notary swears he understood one perfectly and signed it of sound mind. Both cannot be true. One of them is a lie, with a stamp on it. I told you to stay with me. This is the part where it stops being about money. The third document was in the same folder as the loan. 1 page further, and I call it the amendment. It was a change to my father's living trust. The document that says, who gets what when he is gone. The original trust, and I'll come back to how I know it existed, left the house to me. The amendment, executed the same day as the loan, the 3rd of March, 2023. The day a notary swore a man with no capacity was of sound mind, moved the house, and every remaining account to Lorraine Keel. So now, you can see the whole shape of it. And it is uglier assembled than in pieces. First, she took control. Then she paid herself for the love I gave. $156,000 of it. Then, on a single March afternoon, with a notary willing to swear to a lie, she borrowed $180,000 against his house and rewrote his will to hand herself the house on top of it. All of it calm, all of it in daylight, all of it with a pen she had produced in 3 tidy documents, the most complete confession I have ever read, and she'd sworn to it under oath and filed it with a court, because she was so certain no one who loved him would ever bother to read the boring part. I spent 18 months building it into something a judge could not look away from. I am going to move fast through those 18 months, because you already know I survived them, and I'd rather spend the words on what I became than on what I did to get through the days. I filed. As an interested person, I requested the full record, every accounting, every receipt, every bank statement the conservator was legally required to keep and produce. When a receipt was missing, I noted the gap, because in my work a missing receipt is not an absence, it is a fingerprint. I obtained the neurologist's capacity letter through the proper legal channel. As his next of kin, I subpoenaed the notary's logbook, the little bound book every notary is required by law to keep, listing every person they ever swore in, and I already knew what I would find in it before it arrived. And I was right. On the line for the 3rd of March, 2023, in the space for the signer's signature, there was nothing, a blank. My father had never been in the room. The notary had stamped a document for a man who was not there, at a facility across town, being fed applesauce, and I found the original trust. This is the one warm thread in the machinery. So let me give it to you properly. I still had the butterscotch tin. I'd carried it out of that locked house in my coat pocket, and I'd kept refilling it and bringing it to him at the facility every week, because his hands still reached for it even when his eyes didn't reach for me. One evening at my own kitchen table, cleaning it out to refill it, I tipped the whole tin out and the candies scattered and underneath them. Flattened against the bottom was a folded index card I had never seen. It was in my father's handwriting. not the shaky, late handwriting. The old handwriting, the carpenter's block letters. From years before he lost himself. It was a name and a phone number, and above them, 3 words. For Marin. Important. The name was an estate attorney, a man my father had quietly gone to see, on his own, in the good years right after his diagnosis, when he could still feel the future coming, and still do something about it. He had hidden the card and the one object he trusted me to keep forever. And when I called that number, that attorney still had, in his files, the original trust my father signed, while he still knew exactly what he wanted, the real one. The one Lorraine's amendment had tried to paint over, the one that left the house to me. Not because I wanted the house. I want you to hear that. But because my father, while he still had his whole mind, wrote down who I was to him. And no notary's lie could erase it once I had it in my hands. My father, in the last clear season of his life, had prepared for this exact betrayal. He couldn't remember my birthday by the end, but he'd hidden a card in a candy tin for a daughter he trusted to still be caring for him years later. And he was right to trust her. That is the tin. It stopped being the thing that made him smile and became the thing that proved he loved me on purpose. I told you it would come back. Different. The hearing was the 11th of April, 2026. 18 months and 5 days after the locks changed. I am going to tell you how it went, and I need you to understand that I never raised my voice. Not once. Because the whole point, the only satisfying point, is that I didn't have to. Lorraine came in a soft blue suit, looking like the responsible one. She had a lawyer. She had a story about a difficult niece who'd been overwhelmed and resentful, and shut out for her own good. She was calm. She was concerned. She was, right up until the moment she wasn't. Completely in control of the room. I didn't argue with her. Arguing is for people who don't have the receipts. When it was my turn, I did the thing Ruth taught me my first week. I read it back to them, out loud. I did it in numbered statements, flat, in order, and I handed the court a copy of each document as I named it. 1. The conservator paid herself about $156,000 in caregiver fees on these specific dates, for care provided in fact by me, as shown by these badge records and pharmacy logs. 2. On the 3rd of March, 2023, the conservator borrowed $180,000 against a home the ward owned free and clear. 3. That loan and this trust amendment both bear a notarization, swearing the ward was present and of sound mind. 7 weeks after his own neurologist certified, in this letter, that he had no capacity to enter any agreement. 4. The notary's own logbook here shows no signature from the ward on that date. Because the ward was not present. Because the ward was not present. Because the ward was here, at this facility, as these records confirm. 5. The ward's true intentions are set out in the original trust he executed while competent, produced by the attorney who drafted it. Here, I did not say the word fraud. I didn't have to. I just set the pages down, in order, and let the dates do the talking. And I watched the calm come off my aunt's face. One document at a time, like paint under a heat gun. By the 3rd page she'd stopped, looking at the judge. By the 5th she was looking at her lawyer, and her lawyer was looking at the table. I told you cold. Competence is the whole payoff. Here is the payoff. The court found that the caregiver fees were self-dealing. and ordered them repaid in full to the estate. With interest, about $156,000 plus interest, due back to my father. From her, not from him. She has 90 days at a time, forever. Until it is paid. The notary who swore my father was in a room. He was never and lost her commission. Her seal is gone. The loan built on her lie was voided, and the bank that lent the $180,000 went looking for its money. From Lorraine, personally, because it was her signature, and her lie that moved it, not his. The amendment was thrown out as the product of an incapacitated signer, and my father's real trust was restored. His house, the one he built, the one he burned the mortgage for in a coffee can, was his again, clean, the way it had been for 20 years, and Lorraine Keel was removed as conservator, not reassigned, removed. She is no longer anything to my father's money. The whole calm empire she'd built on the certainty that no one would read the boring part came apart in about 11 minutes of numbered sentences. And I never once had to raise my voice, because the paperwork she'd sworn to did all the shouting for me. The matter of whether she'll face more than the money. The district attorney has the notary's blank logbook line, and the 2 impossible dates now. And that is not my decision to make. And I've made my peace with not knowing yet. It is enough for me that everything she built with a pen, I took apart with a pen. She did not go quietly at the end. Which surprised me, given how quietly she'd done everything else. For weeks after, the calls came, the voicemails piling up, each one warmer and more wounded than the last. None of them containing the word sorry. Then, the emails. And then, one Saturday, she came to my door in person, in the soft blue suit, and she stood on my porch, and she said, in the exact voice from my mother's funeral, "Maren, how could you do this to family? After everything, family doesn't do this to family." I stood in my own doorway, and I looked at my mother's sister, and I gave her back the only sentence she'd ever really taught me. I said, "You are right, Lorraine. Family doesn't send invoices." And I let it land. And then I said, "You sent them to a dying man at $20 an hour for 3 years, and you swore to everyone." I just read them back. And I closed the door, not hard, quietly. The way you close a door on someone who is finally, completely out of things to say. She hasn't come back. The voicemail stopped when her lawyer told her they'd become evidence. I don't get the reunion. I want to be honest with you about that, because I promised you the truth. And the truth is that these stories don't end with everyone hugging in a kitchen. My father did not get better. That is not how the illness works. He is in a good facility now, a real one, chosen by me, paid for out of his own restored money the way it should have been all along. And I see him whenever I want, because no one controls that door anymore. Most days he doesn't know my name. That is the price this kind of story quietly charges, and never refunds. I made my aunt give back $156,000, and I could not buy back a single afternoon of the man who used to know me. If you've walked into a room and had someone you love look at you with polite kindness and no recognition, you already know that no verdict fixes that. You just carry it. But there is one thread that came back to me warm, and I'll leave you with it, because I don't believe in ending on the ache, when there is something truer underneath it. My cousin Dell, Lorraine's own son, was in that courtroom on the 11th of April, not on her side, on mine. He'd seen it from the inside for years, and it had eaten at him. And when I asked him quietly whether he'd tell the truth about what he'd watched his mother do, he said yes before I'd finished the sentence. He didn't hand me evidence. I built that myself, cleanly, and I needed to. He handed me something better. He looked at me across that courtroom, and he was not surprised by a single number I read. And that told me I hadn't imagined 6 years of it. Family didn't send invoices. In the end, one member of it just quietly told the truth, and that was enough. And I'll give you one more thing, because the illness does not take everything all at once, and every so often, for no reason anyone can predict. It hands a little back. About a month after the hearing, I was sitting with my father in the good facility, doing nothing, just holding his hand while he watched a bird outside the window, and out of a long silence, without turning his head, he said, in the old voice, the carpenter's voice, "You always did keep the light on for me." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because for years he had left the light on for me, and here he was remembering it backward. Or maybe not backward at all. Maybe remembering the whole truth of it, that we had spent 4 years leaving lights on for each other in the dark. I said, "Always, Dad." He nodded. He kept watching the bird. 30 seconds later, he asked me if I was one of the girls from the church, and he was gone again, and I let him go, because I had gotten the one sentence, and one was enough. I did not cry. I'd spent that already. I just sat there, in the light, holding his hand, keeping the receipt of it the only way that mattered. In my memory, where no notary could touch it. Here is the last thing, and then I'll let you go. The house is my father's again, and one day, the way he wrote down while he still knew my name, it will be mine. I drove out to it last week, in the evening. For the first time since the morning, the lock's changed. My key works again. My real key. The old one. Because I had the brass deadbolt taken off and the original lock put back. And I want you to understand why that mattered so much to me. That I paid a man to undo a lock. I stood on the porch of the house my father built, and before I went inside, I reached over and I turned on the porch light. For 4 years, I thought that light meant I was still somebody's child, that someone was inside, waiting, keeping watch over me as I drove home in the dark. That is what I believed it meant. I was wrong, and I only understood it standing there, in the quiet. The light was never about being waited for. The light was the smallest daily proof that someone was still keeping the house honest. That while the paperwork piled up and the calm voice made its calm arrangements, somebody was still turning on a light every night and saying, without words, "This house is still watched. This man is still loved. You are not going to do this in the dark." So, I turned it on, and I'll keep turning it on every evening. For as long as the house is ours. Long after my father can't remember what a porch light is for. Not because anyone's driving home to it, because it is the record of my worth that someone I loved kept for me, on purpose, in his own careful hand, at the bottom of a candy tin. And because I finally learned the family trade for real. Money remembers what people choose to forget. And now, so do I, and I keep the receipts. My name is Marin Voss. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the light. If any part of this was your story too, if you were ever the sturdy one, the strong one, the one who did all the caring and got sent an invoice for it, then subscribe and stay close, because you are not the difficult one. You never were, and you are not alone in the dark. Somebody, somewhere, is still turning on the light.